What is the difference between a challenger and a champion? I'm going to share with you today what I've discovered about how a challenger becomes a champion. Now, as a parent of a player, I was looking for that edge. Now, over time, in my role as both a parent of an athlete on the elite pathway and as a coach, I have discovered that character is actually that advantage. My name is Coach Dan Williams, and that's why I created the character advantage. Every champion was once a challenger. And the key was that the challenger understood what the standard was and then exceeded that standard to become the new champion. And so the champion challenger cycle continues. Every parent wants their player to be a champion one day. And helping your player move from a challenger to a champion is what I want to help you with today. Now, one of the first things that you need to do is identify the course that you're going to run. And that course is set by the values that you have. What are your values? Knowing what your values are will help you identify the kinds of attitudes that you want to see in your player. Because when you see different things expressed in your player and your response is negative, it's often because that attitude that they're expressing is in contrast to the value that you hold. So knowing what your values are is the first step. Then you want to identify what are the types of attitudes that you want to see expressed when those values are expressed in action. Because that's what attitudes are. Attitudes are values expressed in action. And you also want to know, what do those things look like? What do those attitudes look like when they're not being expressed the way that you desire? So understanding attitudes is really important, and beginning to identify that data, because that's a data point that you're going to use later. So once you know what your course is, the next thing is understanding that the course is never a straight course. It's never a straight line. There's always going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be pauses. Now, as a parent, my player knows me as a parent who likes to tell stories. Now, my athletes also know me as the storytelling coach. I'm always telling stories. And the reason why I'm telling stories is because through stories, I can communicate wisdom and knowledge and communicate it in a way that it leaves them kind of, continuing to think about what it was that I was trying to communicate. There are certain things they get from the story right away, but there's also hidden truths in that story that they begin to kind of really go deeper into, and it takes them time to kind of process that. Now, the story I'm going to tell you right now is one of the stories that I tell. It's a simple story, and hopefully it'll communicate to you in a way that will demonstrate that you don't have to be a good storyteller to be a storyteller. So the story is about two boys and a bear. And these two boys had never experienced the bear. They'd never really hiked much. And all their friends told them, hey, when you go hiking, you need to be really careful to be on the lookout for bears. And of course, these two boys didn't know what they were talking about and kind of shrugged it off and thought, there's no way we'll see a bear. And so off on the hike they went. But they came across a bear and they didn't know what to do. So they started running, and they saw a tree and they started climbing up that tree. Well, one boy was a really good climber. He climbed up the tree. The other boy wasn't a good climber. He just couldn't get his arms around the trunk, and finally he just gave up and then curled up in a ball at the base of the tree. And here comes the bear. The bear is sniffing around. The boy that's up in the tree, he is just scared for his friend's life. He's thinking his friend is going to get killed by the bear, and that's the end of it. But the bear just sniffs around and then just kind of walks off. Now, the boy in the tree just couldn't believe it, and as soon as he thinks that the coast is clear, he comes down out of that tree. He's hugging his friend. He just can't believe that his friend's alive. His friend can't believe he's alive. He's in shock, and they're celebrating. And the boy that was curled up at the end, at the bottom of the tree, said, "You know, the bear talked to me," as they were kind of reliving the moment. And the boy in the tree thought, "There's no way bear can talk." He's like, "That bear didn't talk to you." And he goes, "Yes, he talked to me. As clear as day, I heard him talk to me." "Okay, what did he say?" the boy wanted to know. And his friend said, "The bear told me I needed to pick better friends." Now, the power of that story is there's a lot of hidden truth in that story. There's also truth that hits you right in the face as well. And that's the beauty of stories. Stories have this unique way to communicate things that are deep truths, as well as truths that are lying on the surface, that are easy to pick up and to hold, and to begin to examine, and to begin to see, is that a truth that you want to take into your life as an athlete? And why is this important? Because moments are important. There are two tension points that we always feel as a parent when we're watching our player. It's one tension point is potential, and it's the potential unrealized. We see the potential, we believe the potential, but we don't necessarily believe that they're achieving that potential right now. And the other tension point is time. Time is ticking away and it never stops. And so it's that unrealized potential and that limited amount of time and the fact that time is just marching on. And so those two things cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of tension in our lives as parents as we're watching our players on their elite journey. And in that context of tension, we come across moments in the season, moments in time, where we have unique opportunities to really speak into the heart of our player. And that's really what I'm talking about now, is really your role as a guide. Because that's what I realized that my role was as the parent, was to be the guide for my player. And it was also the role that I have as a coach, that here I have an opportunity to really guide my athletes. But I really want to speak to you as the parent and help you understand your role as a guide and what comes with that role. Your role is to really listen and to really discern where your player is on their journey. Now, you know the course that you're running by identifying the values you have, knowing what those values look like in action through the attitudes that are expressed. But knowing where your player is on the journey that's full of ups and downs and pauses, is really critical as the guide, because you need to know the moment that you're in. And there are three different phases that you're going to find your player in. They're either going to be climbing, or they're going to be descending, or they're going to be standing. And in those three phases, you need to understand how you need to engage as the guide. Because as a guide, if your player is climbing and working hard, then your role is really that of encouraging. And encouraging to help them know that they're moving in the right direction, but also giving them fuel to continue to press on. Or maybe they're in a phase where they're descending. They're coming down off of a win, they're coming down off of a high, they're coming down off of a sense of accomplishment, and things aren't now going their way. Things are becoming more difficult again. And again, your role as a guide, understanding that moment, and well, how do I then encourage in that moment? What does that encouragement look like? Or maybe your player is standing. They're not climbing, nor are they descending. They're just standing. They're almost like in a pause. And in that moment, what is your role as the guide? So really understanding those moments is critical for your role as a guide. And I've learned some wonderful things over the years as a guide for my player on their elite journey. Now, stories are a wonderful way to communicate because stories are really the way that we as humans have transferred knowledge and transferred wisdom since the beginning of time. And you don't have to be a good storyteller to really communicate deep truths. But what we don't respond well to is people that are lecturing us or people that are telling us what we already know we should be doing. What we really need is more of encouragement through deep truth and deep wisdom that helps them learn for themselves, helps them begin to understand the attitude that they have in that moment and maybe what adjustments that they need to make. But those moments of understanding, those moments where they begin to see that clearly, has to come from them. It can't be impressed on them. They have to come to that realization themselves. They have to come to that moment themselves. But understanding how to guide that is really your role as the parent. Now, all of this is important because you want your player to become a champion. But you know that they are just challenging in this moment. And to be a champion requires an extra effort beyond the standard that the last champion has set. And that's where I believe the character advantage is. That in order for your player to take that next step, yes, they need to develop their skills, both their physical skills and their mental skills. But there's one secret weapon that you have as a parent that you can really, really help your player with, and that is helping them develop their character advantage. Because it's often the attitude that we have in that moment where we're the challenger and we're challenging the last champion. So that, when we face those moments, in order to have the boldness, in order to have the courage, we have to have the right attitude in that moment. And that really comes from our heart. And that's your role as a parent, to prepare your player for that moment. That moment that comes where it's anxiety before the big match or the big game or the big event. And they have to face that moment and they have to press through that moment because oftentimes that moment comes with fear or anxiety, and it's how you help them in that moment. And oftentimes how you help them is really on the journey before that moment. And preparing them, getting them ready for that moment when they face it, because then clarity comes in that moment for them. What is it that they believe in themselves? And they begin to lean into the attitude that they know that's going to take them to the next level so that they can become a champion. And at the end of the day, regardless of the score, regardless of what the outcome is, you're going to see a difference in your player. The difference is going to be in the heart because they are going to become champions regardless of what somebody puts in their hands, what somebody puts on their head, what somebody puts around their neck, that isn't all ultimately going to define them as the champion. And we all know it because those things gather dust, they sit on a shelf somewhere, and it's hard to remember those things. But what always goes with us wherever we go is our heart. And the heart of the champion is really what we want to foster, what we want to develop. And that's your role as the guide. Your role as the guide is a privileged role, is a special role, to be able to guide your player on their elite journey to become the champion that they can become. Now, hopefully you've already joined this channel. And if you have, I want you to like this video so you can share it with others that are in your network. Because we want more people to understand how they can be a guide for their players on their elite pathway so that their players can learn and discover how character can be their advantage. Now, once you've liked and joined this channel, I want you to notice that in the descriptive of each of these videos on this channel, I put a link to joining my email list. I really want you to consider doing that today, because when you join my email list, you're going to receive email updates and content and resources that are going to help you become the best guide that you can become on your player's elite pathway. So thank you for joining me today.